big, posh, luxury electric SUVs. Buyers, especially those in big markets like China, cannot get enough of them. Just about every manufacturer has at least one, and Mercedes, well, they've got two, the EQS SUV and the EQE SUV. Now, this is a bit of an unusual one because, of course, these two aren't natural rivals. On the one hand, you have the EQS SUV, complete with a range of over 400 miles, 7-seat versatility, all of the technical fireworks that you could possibly want. It's got a touchscreen that goes the width of the dash. It's got everything you could possibly want. It is the full fat bells and whistles top of the range look at me SUV in Mercedes' fairly extensive lineup of look at me SUVs. But on the other hand, you have got the EQE. Now, let's face it, they both look pretty similar, don't they? And not only that, but this has still got a range of 341 miles, and it doesn't have the 7-seat versatility, but it's still got a lot of the same technical features in it. It's got much the same interior. It's still roomy and luxurious and comfortable. And yet, the EQE is some £39,000 cheaper than the EQS. But is it worth that jump in price from the E to the S? After all, both of these come on the same EV A2 platform as the saloon EQS and EQE siblings, and both, on paper at least, offer very similar strengths. But can they stack up against some strong competition from the likes of the BMW iX and Audi Q8 e-tron? Well, that is what we're here to find out. Right, I'm going to start with a rundown of the EQS. Now, as with the EQE, of course, this looks quite similar to the saloon car that they're both based on. They've got all the same platform as well. And that really is defined by aerodynamics. That's why you've got the clamshell bonnet. That's why it's got this very sleek kind of reached back A-pillar, very smooth surfacing. It's all about kind of trying to make it a bit more efficient. More on efficiency in a minute. I have to say, I think it's a lot less divisive than cars like the BMW iX. I don't think either of them are pretty, but so I don't think the way it looks is why you're going to buy the EQS. I personally really don't like these kickboards either because they just get your trousers grubby every time you get in and out of the car. Anyway, I think there are 3 reasons why you would buy the EQS. 1, the prestige. 2, the range. 3, the seats, because if you look in there, you've got really lovely centre seats, but also you've got really good rear seats. The third row of seats in the S are standard fit, and while it's a bit surprising that you have to raise and drop them manually, it's very easy to do. And once you're in back there, well, you don't only get heated seats, but you also get air vents, cup holders and charging points. As for the boot, well, it is absolutely vast with those rear seats down, and there's even a bit of space left with the 7 seats in place. And when you are ensconced in that middle row of seats, well, there is enough room to lounge about in true limousine comfort. Then there is the front. Now, do you need more touchscreen, do you think? I don't think so. This is the Mercedes Hyperscreen. It goes all the way across the dash. It is the dash, basically. So you've got your massive screen there. You've got a touchscreen here for the passenger. You've got games on there. You can have yet more nav map if you want, all sorts of things. Configurable drivers readout, of course. Touch-sensitive steering wheel. I actually don't mind it too much. You will never convince me that physical buttons on a steering wheel are not a better option. But in the scheme of touch-sensitive steering wheels, the Mercedes one is definitely one of the better. So I don't mind the Hyperscreen. It's completely unnecessary, but it does look cool, and it's not too bad to use, so most of the functions you want quite easy to reach. Otherwise, the quality, well, you've got ambient lights that will dance to your music if you want them to. You've got all kinds of fancy things going on in here. The seats are second to none, and yeah, you are not going to be disappointed in terms of the quality in here. And it's fair to say that any EQS will be just as sumptuous as our test car, as even the cheaper of the two trims gets the glass roof, Burmester sound system, dramatic ambient lighting settings, fingerprint recognition to save your settings, augmented head-up display and more. So the EQE then, is it going to feel like slumming it after the EQS, or is it going to feel really tiny? Well, no, to be honest, it's not. It feels really quite posh inside still, and pretty practical. So you get a 520 litre boot back here, there's cable storage under there, you're going to get everything in there I think that you're going to want for the average family. Yes, it is quite a bit smaller than the EQS, which gets 800 litres when it's in 5-seat mode, but I don't think you're going to be disappointed. The rear seats aren't likely to disappoint either. There isn't quite as much legroom as there is in the EQS, but that is a bit like complaining that your palace has fewer rooms than Versailles. Nobody's going to feel short of comfort and luxury in here. It does feel a little bit smaller in here in the EQE than it does in the EQS. Notably, it's getting into the back seats that you notice that the doors aren't as long, so there's definitely a bit less of that limo feel about it. But you sit up here and honestly, it feels much the same, especially if you've got the Hyperscreen here. Although, I would add, this is an option on the AMG line Premium Plus that we would go for, and that's the mid-spec one. So if you go for either of the two lower trims in the EQE, then you don't get the hyperscreen unless you pay extra. I don't think that's a big problem, because you still get a 12-inch massive touchscreen in the centre that's got all your features you want, your CarPlay, your Android Auto and all of that stuff. So I think the hyperscreen, lovely as it is, like I said, it is unnecessary, isn't it? So I would go for that AMG line Premium Plus. I wouldn't bother with the hyperscreen. And I mean, that car, it still gets the roof, the Burmester sound system, the fancy LED lights, digital LED headlights, all of that stuff. So it gets everything that you want, really. And it's still a lot cheaper than the EQS. Go for that mid-spec EQE SUV in the lower powered 350 model that we'd be most tempted by, and you're looking at £99,260. That's hardly cheap, but it is £30,000 cheaper than the EQS equivalent. Although it has to be said that you need to go for the higher spec AMG Line Plus EQE if you really want comparable equipment, and that's only £18,000 off the EQS. Suddenly not quite such an outrageous price gap given the additional range, kudos and 7-seat perks of the S. So here we have got the EQS 450 4MATIC, and there's only two models in the EQS range. This is the lesser of them, even though it's got 355 brake horsepower and it will do 0 to 62 in just over 6 seconds. So it's not slow, especially, I would add, for a car that's got 118 kilowatt hours of battery in its floor plan and weighs over 3.1 tonnes. So this is not a small or lightweight car, but it does, I have to say, it is lovely to drive. I mean, the S-Class has always had that sort of just something else about it, hasn't it? It's always just been so kind of exceptional to spend time in and drive. And I have to say, this does have that aura to it. It's got standard adaptive air suspension all round, of course, and it's got that really wafty kind of lovely ride quality to it. So I think that's really the defining character of the EQS in the way it drives, is that it really does feel like a chauffeur car, but one that you're going to chuck the dogs in the boot and get the kids in the back and spend your life driving around in and that kind of thing. So that's pretty impressive, really. However, I have to say there's one thing that kind of spoils it a bit, and that's the brake feel, because it's got really peculiar brake response. There's quite a lot of travel to it, and you don't seem to get much response initially, and then you get lots lower down the travel movement. So that can be quite hard to get to grips with. But even so, like I said, it's just really, really like peachy to drive. I don't know why you'd go for the more powerful one. You can get the 500, which will do 0 to 62 in about 4.7 seconds. It's so unnecessary. This is more than fast enough. Yeah, I really do like the way it drives, but I can't stop myself from kind of raising the issue of efficiency here. So we're talking about, like I said, a car with 118 kilowatt hours of battery in order to achieve that 400 mile, slightly over 404 miles maximum WLTP range. But we have to get to a point where we're not just kind of shoehorning more and more battery into EVs in order to make them go further. It's just not, it's not sustainable. We really have to be mandating and looking for efficiency. And nobody knows that better than Mercedes, who just literally in the last few days before we filmed this, their new concept car, the Vision concept car, well, that has done nearly 9 miles per kilowatt hour. It's set the global world record for efficiency. So manufacturers are working on this. They're looking for efficiency too. And I do feel like with cars like the EQS and the EQE, we're sort of slightly at the end of an era where unfortunately we're just seeing more battery to get more range. And I can't wait to see that become more efficiency rather than just more battery. No surprises that the EQS wins for real-world range, even if it is thanks to sheer volume of battery rather than the efficiency, given that this bigger car will do around 3 miles per kilowatt hour at best, while we've seen more like 3.3 from the EQE. Even so, we managed an impressive 300 mile real-world range in the EQS without trying very hard, and you're probably more likely to see 280 up to about 350 depending on conditions. By comparison, the EQE managed 270 miles in the same conditions, or we would estimate that you'll probably see more like 250 up to about 320. Here we are in the EQE 500, and it's quite a thing too. So this is the faster of the EQEs, unless you go for the AMG, which is just entirely unnecessary. But there you go. So you go for the 500 and you're getting 402 brake, and it'll do 0 to 62 miles an hour in 4.7 seconds. So it's really quite fast, this. And there is a bit of an edge of sportiness to the EQE that I don't think you get in the EQS. That may partly be down to the weight, because as I've already referenced in the EQS, it's a heavy old thing. And this is getting on for 600 kilos lighter, so that makes a big difference to the way it handles. So it does sort of turn into corners a bit more keenly. The steering feels a touch sharper. It's just a car that's been set up to be a bit more of a, you know, rewarding drive rather than a big old chauffeur car for the family. So you do feel that, and I like that. I think it is a really nice car to drive because it's still got very predictable pedal responses. The brake feel in this, as it is in the EQS, is also a bit iffy, so it's a bit unpredictable. That's the one kind of issue with these big electric Mercedes, is they can't seem to quite get that brake feel right. But it's still a lovely car to drive smoothly, and unlike the EQS, it is something that you might actually choose to drive with a bit of vigour if you want to. Little side note here, I did mention an EQS 500 just now, but you can't get one of those. It's called the EQS 580, so do accept my apologies for getting slightly the wrong model name there. Anyway, I think I would just go for the EQE 350, which is the lower powered of the standard EQEs. It's a lot cheaper, and even if it's, you know, 0 to 62 in about 6.5 seconds, something like that, it's still going to be absolutely fine. I think it's still going to be the better choice given the costs. What is a shame is that you have to go for one of the top 2 trim levels on the EQE to get the 4-wheel steering. And that's a shame because it makes quite a big difference to the manoeuvrability of this car. It's still a fairly chunky car, and if you add the 4-wheel steering, then it drops that turning circle quite noticeably, and you're going to really, you know, benefit from that in your average multi-storey car park and that kind of thing. However, unfortunately, if you go for the 350 in the sort of AMG line premium trim that we think makes most sense for the sort of cost efficiency, it's 12 grand to jump up from that trim that we'd recommend to the next one that does get the 4-wheel steering. It's a huge price jump. I'd still live without 4-wheel steering and save the money, but it is a shame because it is a good system and you do notice the benefits when you're trying to park it and manoeuvre it. Still, it's a lovely thing to drive, and I do think that what with the standard air suspension on this, rides really nicely. The EQS has got the edge on that front. It's got that sense of where it's kind of almost kind of Rolls-Royce-esque. It's kind of pressing the road into submission rather than just riding nicely, whereas this just feels like a really well set up, really soft, lovely, cushy premium SUV. But I mean, gosh, you know, how much comfort do you want? It really is lovely, and the refinement's great. The big EQS definitely wins when it comes to topping up the battery though. With 200 kilowatt charging speeds, it beats the EQE's peak charging rate of 170 kilowatts, meaning that it will do a 100-mile top-up in around about 10 minutes, compared with about 15 in the EQE. So I don't think you're going to be able to knock the refinement and general luxuriousness of the EQE, even if it isn't quite the range-topping version. I think a good way to think of these two is a bit like the full-fat Range Rover and the Range Rover Sport. They're both really lovely, really excellent luxury electric SUVs. And if you want the full fat one, well, it's right there for you. And it does feel like a great evolution of the S-Class. It feels like everything in S-Class is proper limo sort of driving dynamics and sort of comfort. It's really great in that respect. And of course that 7-seat versatility. So it's got a lot going for it. But it is expensive. And even though with the finances really, you know, look at it and the spec for spec, there's probably more like about 17 to 18 grand in between these two, not factoring in the extra range and 7 seats that you get in the EQS. So, you know, that's not too bad. I can see why you would go for the EQS. I would go for the EQE because I feel like you're getting sort of 95% of its potential for a much better price. And you know what? It is really good in its own right, even up against rivals like the Q8 e-tron and the BMW iX and this kind of thing. So they're both really lovely luxury electric SUVs. Not cheap, but really lovely. And don't forget, you can head and watch the Q8 e-tron review and the BMW iX review on CarGurus UK YouTube channel. While we've got you, please do like the video, subscribe to the channel and ring that little bell so that you don't miss any of our videos.